What's going on YouTube, and welcome back once again to the channel. Before we get into today's video, make sure to subscribe and stack that like button. So in today's video, I'm going to be ranking my top 5 offensive line units in the NFL. I'm continuing the top 5 of each position series, but the difference here is I'm not doing top 5 offensive linemen as like single players. I'm counting down the top 5 offensive line units. So without further ado, let's begin. Coming in at number 5, I have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offensive line. Which is a very interesting offensive line to me. Last year, they allowed the least amount of sacks of any team to their starting quarterback in Tom Brady. And, obviously that's vital when you have a quarterback as old as Tom Brady. What I find interesting about the Buccaneers offensive line, and really almost every offensive line that's ever protected Tom Brady, is their success comes from their, them as a group. Them as a single lineman don't really, impress all that much. Like there really isn't a player on that Buccaneers offensive line that's like, whoa, this guy's a top tier offensive lineman. They're all just like a guys grouped together that together build a great offensive line. And that's something that, for whatever reason, whether it's Brady magic or what, that has always been something that's been the case with Tom Brady's offensive lines, and you see it here in Tampa, where the offensive line is just able to play great together. Coming in at number 4, I have the Chargers offensive line. Now, this is a little bit more of a projection rather than what they did last year. The Chargers offensive line last year allowed 31 sacks, which isn't that much. That's a little less than 2 per game, which is not that bad at all. But I'm looking at that offensive line right now, and I'm thinking this offensive line has the potential to be maybe a top 3 offensive line in football. At left tackle, they drafted Rashawn Slater last year in the first round. And last year, during the season, he was a top 3 left tackle in football. Then at the guard position, they drafted Zion Johnson in the first round this draft. Now they have another first round talent right there on the left side. At center, they have a good veteran, Corey Linsley, who played in Green Bay for a while. Right guard is their biggest weak spot, but then at right tackle, they got Brian Bulaga, another guy from that Green Bay offensive line that we all know. Green Bay's offensive line was very good for many years and still is good, not really on the top 5 level anymore, but yeah, so you look at that, you have 4 Pro Bowl caliber players, 4 All-Pro caliber players on that offensive line for Justin Herbert, and it really makes sense what the Chargers have done. They've invested heavily in being able to protect Justin Herbert. They're learning from their past mistakes, because during the entire Philip Rivers era, Philip Rivers never had a good offensive line, and that was very much hurt the success of the team. And now with their new young promising quarterback that has way more potential than Philip Rivers and any quarterback you could think of, they're building a great offensive line. And I think if this group gels well together, this could become a top 3 O-line in football. So it's a bit of a bold prediction, but I think it's one that is a very calculated and educated guess, because you got to remember, this is kind of predicting the top 5 going into next year, even though I'm also considering last year, obviously. So, coming in at number 3, Dallas Cowboys offensive line. Their offensive line is always at the top of lists. They lost La'el Collins this past offseason. They actually released him, which was a bit of a surprise, but they still have veterans like Tyron Smith and Zach Martin there, and TB was a younger offensive lineman. They got Connor Williams, who had some rough moments last year, but is still growing. So I think that Cowboys offensive line is going to continue to be good, even with the loss of La'el Collins. It's not like La'el Collins was their best. They still have their 2 cornerstones that they've had at offensive line there for almost the past decade, in Tyron Smith and Zach Martin, 2 guys that are for sure Hall of Famers going to next year. And yeah, they're going to continue to be able to protect their quarterback, Dak Prescott. Coming in at number 2, I have the Philadelphia Eagles. The Philadelphia Eagles offensive line is another offensive line that has just been top tier over the last few years. At left tackle, They still have Lane Johnson there, a veteran who's been there a while and who's great. They still have at center Jason Kelsey, obviously Travis Kelsey's brother, who is possibly a future Hall of Famer as well. Last off season, they drafted Landon Dickerson, who was a center, but they drafted him in the second round, and a good pick. Got him at left guard, and he's young and still developing. They drafted Cam Jurgens this year, who's a promising player. So they have a good variety of veteran presence along with young presence in that offensive line. And I think it really doesn't matter who's running the football for the Eagles, because that offensive line is really just that good. And that's really been the Eagles' signature over the last few years, how good their offensive line is, and it's continuing to be good. Now, coming in at number one, this is another one that is a slight projection, but at the same time, it's an offensive line that was very good last year. And it's the Kansas City Chiefs offensive line. Look, just 2 seasons ago in the Super Bowl, they got completely embarrassed in front of everybody, and it looked like that offensive line had 5 years of rebuilding ahead of it. And in a single off season, the Chiefs were able to completely revamp their offensive line. In a sense, here's the quick timeline of what they did. They cut their 2 starting tackles who were already on the older side and were coming off of big injuries. And they went and signed Joe Thuney to a massive contract, who was one of the best offensive linemen Tom Brady's ever have, and who is still in his middle age when it comes to football. They still have they went and signed Kyle Long. They traded for Orlando Brown. They drafted Creed Humphrey, who was a promising center coming out of college in 2020. And then they also drafted Trey Smith, who turned out to be the steal of the draft. They got him, I believe, in the 5th or 6th round, and that guy wound up being a Pro Bowl guard for them. So if you look at their guard right now, at left tackle they have Orlando Brown, and more on him in a second. But at left tackle they have Orlando Brown, who is a top 5 left tackle in football. Then you got Joe Thuney at left guard, who is a top 5 left guard in football. Then you got Creed Humphrey at center, and according to PFF, was the best center last year in the NFL as a rookie. And he's only going to get better, and he played so good. Then at right guard, Trey Smith, who was also a top 10 guard in football last year. And then at right tackle, which is probably, their weakest spot on the line, but it's really not weak. They have options there. They have 3 different guys that can start there. They have Lucas Niang, who's coming off of an injury, but who played well last year when playing at right tackle. Then they drafted Darian Kinnard in the 4th round this year, a guy who was evaluated to go in the 2nd round, so he could easily start for them. And then there's Andrew Wiley, who they've had there a while, who can play any position on the offensive line. So if worst comes, if Kinnard and Niang are just not it, they can put Andrew Wiley in, no problem. This offensive line is built to run the football and to be able to protect the passer. I mean, this offensive line, I think, is going to only get better, and I think it's going to be the best offensive line in football this upcoming season. And I'm excited to see Patrick Mahomes with this kind of offensive line. Now, the one wild card / wrinkle to this offensive line is the Orlando Brown situation that's unfolded over the last couple of weeks. Now, the Chiefs were not able to reach a deal with him by the deadline, and they had franchise tagged him. Orlando Brown is yet to sign the franchise tag, as you probably already know. But according to Orlando Brown's agent, the vibe is that there's no bad blood between the 2 sides. They just weren't able to get a deal done. They'll try and get it done next year, and he'll just sign to the franchise tag this year and play. Now, if Orlando Brown, for whatever reason, does not play, obviously this is still a top-tier offensive line, but it's not the number 1, because then what happens is it's not only Orlando Brown doesn't play, then you're affecting the rest of the offensive line, because then you're going to have to move everybody over a spot, change a couple people here and there, and it's just going to ruin the whole continuity and rhythm that the offensive line had last year heading into this season. So hopefully Orlando Brown does play, but like I said, if he does, I think this Chiefs offensive line is going to be really darn good. But comment down below what you guys think about this. Who do you think is the best offensive line in football? I think it really comes down to the top 5 I mentioned. I don't think there's really any others that you can argue, but any of these 5 I feel like you can argue is going to be the best offensive line in football next year. But other than that, I'll see you guys next time.